Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 298 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I talk a little bit about adapting your style. So we all need to adapt our style in the workplace and in leadership, depending on the situation. But I'm interested in helping you make it a little bit more sustainable so we don't burn out. So that's the topic of this episode, which we're going to get into right now. So adapting your style to suit the situation is huge. So we hear this sort of concept in situational leadership, where you will adapt your leadership style depending on what's required in the given situation. So sometimes if there's an emergency going on or something needs immediate attention, you might be more direct. There's no time to collaborate with people because you need to tell them what they need to do, get out of the burning building. It's not like, well, how do you think we should get out of this burning building? Let's all have a show of hands. Time is of the essence. So sometimes you might have a more directive leadership style. But if you're like most thoughtful leaders, being directive and blunt or giving constructive feedback may not be your normal style. A lot of thoughtful leaders I work with have a more calm, methodical style, and they're quite accommodating and they really value their people. But this can introduce people-pleasing tendencies, which I've discussed on previous episodes. Now, people-pleasing tendencies can be a great thing because you can obviously help people feel valued and appreciated. However, sometimes you need to be more direct. You need to change your style. Maybe you're a quieter leader and you need to be more outgoing to network with people or to give a speaking engagement or a presentation. Or maybe you're more outgoing and you have to tone it down a little when you're talking to your quiet CEO, for example. So there's lots of different examples where we need to adapt our style. Now, there are some leaders I've worked with who sort of have the attitude of, oh, we'll take it or leave it. That's just how I am. That's just my style. They have to deal with it, right? This sort of attitude is frustrating for me because it is limiting, right? And it's very much a non-growth mindset type of attitude in that if you just don't want to adapt your style for anybody and you're saying my way is the right way, you have to take it or leave it, then I tell you what, a lot of people are going to leave it and you're not going to be able to build those positive relationships around you. So this episode is all about trying to make it more sustainable when you do adapt your style. So I don't believe that you can stay in your own normal style or your default style all the time. So personally, I'm a quieter person. I'm quite relatively introverted. But over time, what I've realized is I've become quite good at adapting my style. So I can be a bit louder and sociable when I need to be. I can give speaking presentations. I deliver a lot of training, so I have to be outgoing to run activities and things like that. And I'm never going to be the most outgoing person in the world, but I can do it for short periods and then restore myself later on to my normal style, which is a bit more quiet and steady. So I've become pretty good at that over the years, and I think a lot of it's due to my time in consulting where I had to sort of get out there and network and stand up in front of executives and all that sort of good stuff. So today I'm going to give you a few tips on how you might do that better. Now, the first tip here comes from a retired professor called Brian Little. I believe he was from Harvard, and I think he's retired now. You can Google him. He's got interesting resources and a blog as well. But he talks about the importance of personal projects. So Brian Little is a super introvert, and actually I'll put a link to his resources in the show notes page as well, which today will be thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/298. He talks about the importance of personal projects. Now, he's a super introvert, very quiet person, very reserved, but when he is speaking and lecturing, he is very extroverted because he has to be on stage and he enjoys telling people about his research and what's the latest thing going on in personality psychology and all those things. So he talks about the concept of personal projects where you will choose to adapt your style. And by personal project, what he means is it's a passion, something you are willing to stand up for or you're really passionate about, that you're willing to adapt your style for. So, as usual with these episodes, I like you to reflect and think about things differently in your leadership. And I want you to think about for me, what are your personal projects? Like it might be your family, could be one. It could be furthering a project in your workplace. It could be getting promoted. It could be career development, whatever it might be. So I want to think about what are your personal projects? And these are things you're passionate about where you would be willing to adapt your style. So an example Brian Little gives in one of his TED Talks is going to a hospital and you might be like an agreeable person, but you could be disagreeable if you go to the hospital to get help for your sick child, if they're not able to help, and you have to basically be a bit more pushy to get them to listen to you and to get that help for your child. So that's an example of where you would adapt your style because one of your personal projects is your family and the health of your family. So this is all about picking your battles. And this is important in my view because it helps you to make the call as to, is this important enough for me to put myself out there and adapt my style? Or is this something I'm comfortable to let go? And so one of my personal projects is really Thoughtful Leader. The content I put online, the marketing I do, the podcast I do, that is something I'm willing to go on podcast interviews and all these sorts of things because I am passionate about having a bit more thoughtful leadership in the world, which I think is needed right now. So the first thing is personal projects. They're really important. So I'd ask you to reflect on those. What are your personal projects and passions? The second way you can approach that is by using your values as a reference point as well. And as you know, I talk a lot about values. I'm very passionate about the importance of understanding your own personal values. And I have a online course, which is fairly quick and easy to take. I'll put a link to that on the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/298. I really encourage you to take that course. But the reason is because I see understanding your personal values as a really important foundation for good leadership. So check that resource out as well. So personal values can be a good yardstick to make decisions by. So I personally have my personal values on my wall next to my laptop, just so they remain at the front of my mind. I think about them a lot. And the reason these are important is you might choose to adapt your style and be more direct or confrontational or more quiet or whatever it is. You might choose to adapt your style because you are standing up for your values or you're aligning with your values. So for example, if someone's being bullied and one of your values is, acceptance or belonging or something like that, you might adapt your style and call out that bully, even though it's hard and it's threatening to you and you feel scared. So your values are really important reference points. And these go along with the personal projects, in my view. They can be used as a decision-making point to decide, should I adapt my style here or should I let it go? Another thing that Brian Little talks about, which I really appreciate, and I realize now that I've been doing this my whole life, but I never really realized it in this way. Well, he talks about the concept of what he calls restorative niches. And that's a bit of an academic term, but in plain speaking, they really are just times where you can restore in your normal style. So if you're more of an introverted character like myself, you will need to build time into your day or opportunities to restore. And that might be by going to low stimulation environments, sitting by yourself in a meeting room, going for a walk at lunchtime, whatever it is, you need those times to restore, and they're called restorative niches, according to Brian Little. Now, those are really important because if you constantly are acting as someone else in your leadership role, you're having to be more outgoing when you're actually not, or maybe you're having to be quiet when you're really not, for example, you might find it exhausting. And what we don't want is for you to burn out. So you need time to restore. So even if you're an outgoing person, like an extrovert, you need time to restore as well. And that time for you might be very different than an introvert. So for an extrovert, that might look like having social interaction, yeah, hanging out with friends, doing something in a high stimulation environment. So maybe listening to really intense music or something like that. So those restorative niches are really important, those times to restore back to your energy levels. So I'll get you to reflect on that right now as well. What are your restorative niches that you build into your working day and working week? When do you recover? What I find is it's best to have these sort of restorative niches going throughout the day and throughout your working week. Because if you, and I know some leaders sort of work all day and they're adapting their style and they feel like they're acting all day, and then they come home and they sort of crash, and that's when they restore, which is a really hard way to do it because you're riding the roller coaster all day and it's completely exhausting. So what I'd recommend is try to build in these times to restore during the day. So the question is, what time do you use to restore during the day? And I think it's something you need to prioritize, because if we don't do it, we can lead down the path of burnout. Another thing to do to help you do this is to communicate with your team and key stakeholders as well. So I think it's really important to let people know what your sort of style is. So if you want to go for a walk at lunchtime by yourself or have some quiet time somewhere to check your email or something like that, I think it's okay to let people know that that's what you do to restore and recover so that you can be at your best for the rest of the day. Without that sort of communication, I find some people sort of keep their style a bit of a secret. They don't want to tell people what they need. They're sort of playing a part all day as the leader, really not looking after themselves at all and not communicating what they need to their key people, which could be their team or their boss. So I think it's important. I don't think it's really necessarily important to tell your team that you're an introvert or an extrovert, or this is my personality profile, here's my report. I don't think that's necessarily what's needed here. I think what's needed is clear communication about what you need to be able to restore and recover and be your best throughout the day. And I think what you need to do then is safeguard those boundaries so that you are making it clear that this is important to you. So I think communication is key, setting those expectations that, you know what, once a day, I just need half an hour. I'm going to go sit in the meeting room, check my email, write some emails by myself, enjoy that quiet time to actually get some work done. And then I can come back out and help you with whatever you need. So it's important to communicate. Another thing to notice, I think, and to help you do this to make it a bit more sustainable to adapt your style, is picking the right environment for you. So I was reading a post on Reddit the other day in the leadership subreddit where someone was talking about, well, I feel like I'm acting all day. So I have to put on a face. I have to tell my team that, I've got it all under control and I've got the best ideas and I'm not worried or stressed. And I have to pretend to my boss that everything's going fine. And my first thought for them was, well, it just sounds like a horrible environment. So it's a horrible environment that's being created, and maybe the company culture is such that people are scared of being open and honest. But if you feel like you're acting all day, every day, and you have to keep on a face, present a certain face to the business or to your clients or stakeholders, you are going to burn out fast because it is exhausting. Because essentially what you have is this cognitive dissonance, which is this tension that's created. You're doing one thing, but you're thinking another and you want to do something else. So you have this dissonance. Your actions and your thoughts and feelings are not aligned, and probably your values aren't aligned with your actions either. So you've got to pick the right environment for you, or start to work with your team and stakeholders to start to create it and set expectations about what you need. Because if you're running around pretending everything's fine all the time, there's no benefit in that. If you can't be yourself and you can't be honest, then you're going to have trouble. I'm not saying you need to be yourself all the time and you don't adapt your style. Adapting is really useful to get the best out of the people around you, but you need to be in the right environment where you don't have to adapt your style all day, every day, because that's a sure way to lead to burnout. Okay, I'd love your thoughts on this one. thoughtleader.com/podcast/298 is the show notes page. Put in some comments there. Do you find you're acting all the time? Do you feel like you are adapting your style too much? And I'm also interested in, what do you do to restore? What are these restorative niches that you put into your workplace and your workday to make sure you can restore yourself? Really keen to hear what you think there. And hopefully, if you like this episode, give me a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. I know I asked you to do this all the time, and if you've already done it, you must be thinking, well, this is annoying. But lots of people listen and they don't do that. So please take a few seconds to do that, because it helps me spread the word about the podcast, and it gets this podcast into the ears of the other thoughtful leaders that possibly don't know about it yet and could really benefit. So thank you in advance, and I'll be back next week.